The rain had been falling on the low fen for 9 days, and on the 10th the Halvard O came up over the second mark on the gauge post at Ellerby Wash, and did not stop coming. Damaris Rushmer walked the last 4 miles along the bank top, because the drove roads had gone under in the night, and the bank was the only dry thing left in that country. She carried a bundle in oilcloth under one arm, and heard the men a half-mile before she saw them. Men working together make one kind of noise. Men arguing make another, and it carries further. The 9 Holes sluice stood where the O turned north, and gave its floodwater to the Wash. 3 gates, oak and iron, in a frame of old brick, and the middle gate stood open the width of a coffin and would not come home. The water went through that gap the color of strong tea, and fast. 14 men were on the sluice, and 2 horses stood in the traces of a chain that ran to the heel of the gate. They were dragging at it against the whole weight of the river, and the frame was giving before the gate. Damaris saw the brick shift, and mortar come out of a joint and go into the water. She went along the wall to the gauge post, because that was what her father had taught her to look at before anything else. Read the water first. The water is the only thing on a fen that never lies to you. The post was cut in feet and quarters, painted over so often the numbers stood up like scar tissue. The flood stood at 4.5 feet above the sill, and she put her hand flat on the brick and felt the frame shivering under her palm. She did the sum without meaning to, the way another woman might hum. The Wash was 190 acres, laid out for exactly this and nothing else. It would take that flood and drown nothing but grass. They were not going to lose the Wash. They were going to lose the sluice, and behind the sluice lay the low fen, and the low fen had houses on it. A man sat on horseback at the landward end in a black riding coat, quite still. Another stood at his stirrup, lean, in gray, speaking up quickly with one hand out flat, the way a man speaks when he wants a decision he has already made for you. "There is nothing else for it, Your Grace. We must cut the bank at Sedgedrove and let it away over the low ground." Sedgedrove had 11 cottages on it. She had passed the roofs an hour ago, sitting out of the water like a row of wet cats. "No," Damaris said. She had not meant to say it aloud. Every face on the sluice turned, and she understood she had 4 seconds before somebody told her to be quiet, so she did not argue. She walked out onto the sluice. "Take the horses off," she said to the carter, close enough to touch him, in the ordinary voice a person uses to ask for the salt. "You will have the frame out of the brick in a minute, and then no man here shuts that gate this winter." The carter looked past her for somebody to say otherwise, found nobody quick enough, and did it. You cannot close a gate against a head of water. Not with horses, not with the whole county. You are pulling against the O, and the O does not get tired. Open the other 2. Open them wide. Let the Wash take it. Let the water this side come up until it stands level with the water that side. When there is no head, there is no push, and that gate will come home on the fingers of one hand. "The Wash will flood," said the lean man in gray. He had come up behind her, quiet on wet brick for a heavy step, perhaps 40, with a long, pleasant, tired face. "Forgive me. There is stock on it. Then fetch the stock off. It will take a quarter of an hour. The grass will be there again in April. The cottages on Sedgedrove will not." She put 2 fingers on the painted mark. The Wash was cut to hold 6 feet. "You have 18 inches in hand, and you are proposing to drown 11 houses to save a field of winter grass." Nobody moved. Then the man on the horse said, "Do as she says." He did not raise his voice. He turned his horse and rode down off the bank toward the house, and 14 men went to the upper gates and put their bars in. It took 40 minutes. The Wash filled and went from green to brown to a wide sheet of pewter with the reed tops standing out of it, and the water stopped shouldering the brick and began, slowly, to lie down. At 20 minutes past 3, the middle gate came home against its sill, with a sound like a door shutting in an empty house. Damaris picked up her bundle and went down to the house, to do what she had come 4 miles in the rain to do. Salomir stood on the only rise for 6 miles, long and low and pale, with a great cedar on the lawn, and every window in it dry. She waited an hour in a stone passage, and was then taken into a room with a fire in it. The Duke of Halvard stood at the window with his back to her, younger than the riding coat had made him look, perhaps 32, dark, with a long jaw, and a still way of holding himself. "You are wet," he said, to the window. "I am, Your Grace. Sit by the fire. I would rather stand. If I sit down, I shall not say it properly. He turned round at that. My name is Damaris Rushmer. My father is Elias Rushmer. He is held at the county gaol at Harlingford for debt, and the greater part of that debt is owed to this estate. £940 on 2 bonds. He is 61 years old. He has a weakness of the chest, and he has been in that place since the spring. Her hands were perfectly steady, which surprised her, because everything else about her was shaking. I have come to beg mercy. I will not dress it up. I cannot pay you, and I have no friend to speak for me. I have come to stand in front of you and ask, because a thing so large ought to be asked for by somebody's face and not by somebody's letter. The fire moved. Rushmer, said the Duke of Halvard. Elias Rushmer, the surveyor. He was, once. Something went through his face then, and Damaris, who had spent 5 years learning to read men who held her father's paper, could not read it at all. It passed over him like weather over a field, and what it left behind was so carefully nothing that it frightened her worse than a refusal. The drove roads are under water. You will not reach Harlingford tonight. Ordish will have a room made up. Your Grace, my father, you will have my answer in the morning. And he walked out and left her standing in his drawing room with her wet hair and the fire drying the steam out of her skirts. Ordish was waiting in the passage. The blue room, Your Grace? The blue room. The Duke stopped, and Ordish, who had made a study of him since he was a boy in nankeen trousers, saw him do a thing he had not done in the whole of that year, which was hesitate. Ordish, in the morning I am going to ask that young woman to marry me. Ordish said, Very good, Your Grace, because that is what a butler says. He said nothing else at all. He went down to the still passage and stood a moment with his hand on the rail and thought about the name Rushmer, which he had heard spoken aloud in that house exactly once before, 20 years ago, by the 5th Duke, behind a shut door. He had been told that night to forget it. He had been paid, that Christmas, rather more than he was owed. Damaris did not sleep. She sat up in a borrowed shift with the oilcloth bundle on her knees and listened to the rain come back after midnight. She had told the Duke of Halvard the truth. She had simply not told him all of it, and the piece she left out was the piece that mattered, and it lay under her hands in cloth gone soft with handling. 6 books, her father's field books, 30 years boiled down to the 6 he kept when the bailiffs took the rest. Levels and sections and bank profiles in a small upright hand that got smaller as the years went on. She had carried them out of Harlingford under her cloak the day they came for the furniture, and twice been offered money for them by men who gave no names. Her father had said one thing about them on the last morning, holding her wrist harder than he knew. Not to anybody, Damaris. Not the commissioners, not a lawyer, not the parish. There is a thing in the 5th book. Do not go looking for it, and do not let it be found. She had not gone looking, and that was the truth she was most ashamed of, because everybody on the Low Fen knew what Elias Rushmer was. 20 years ago, the Marham Bank had gone out in a February flood at 3 in the morning, 400 yards of it, and the water had come through onto sleeping ground and taken cattle and stacks and cottages and 9 people. He had set the levels for that bank and signed the certificate that said it was made good. He had never once said he did not do it. He had only stopped taking work, then stopped being offered it, then begun to borrow, and then to borrow to pay what he had borrowed, until the arithmetic closed over him the way water closes over a low field. And his daughter, who could read a level and a section as easily as she read English, had never opened the 5th book. She told herself it was obedience. She knew quite well it was fear. She was afraid her father had been guilty, that the proof was in her own hands, and that she had carried it about the country for 5 years, like a woman carrying a stone she has promised not to weigh. If the estate pressed, he would go to the Fleet at Lady Day. She had until Lady Day. That was her side of it. The house's side she did not understand until the morning. Salomere was not a poor house. That was the first thing wrong with it. The gravel was raked, the lamps trimmed. There was beeswax on the stairs and hot bread in the passages, and the linen was better than any Damaris had slept in since she was 18. But she had grown up in a country kept alive by works, and works do not care how well the gravel is raked. From the window you could see 3 miles of the Halvard levels, and on those 3 miles she counted, without trying, 4 things her father would have put in a report before breakfast. Willow was growing on the crown of the main bank at Ellerby, which no man allows who means a bank to hold. because the roots make a road for water. New white brick in the 9-hole sluice had been laid without a proper tooth into the old work, so that a hair of daylight stood between them, and daylight in a sluice becomes a river in about 9 years. The wind engine on the low fen turned handsomely with nobody attending it, and threw about half what a wheel that size should, and the gauge post at Ellerby Wash had been painted over, not repainted, which is honest work, painted over, so that the old marks did not show, and 9 days of rain read 4.5 feet against a scale Damaris was nearly certain had been set 8 or 9 inches too low. You may hide a great deal of neglect on a fen for a great many years, because a fen forgives you every summer. It presents its bill all at once, in February, at 3 in the morning, to the people asleep on the low ground. The housemaid came in for the water jug, and Damaris asked her who kept the drainage rate books. Mr. Bly, ma'am, and the household books. Who settles with the tradesmen? Mr. Bly, ma'am, said the girl, surprised to be asked twice for the same answer, and went out with the jug. You are looking at my nephew's drains, said a voice behind her, and you have the face of a woman doing sums. Come here where I can see you. Lady Adeline Ferrand was 79, and had come to Salomir as a bride when the 5th Duke was a boy in the nursery. She sat in a chair built round her with a stick across her knees, and had the whitest hair and the blackest eyes Damaris ever saw in a human head. Sit, not there. There, where the light is on you. You are the surveyor's daughter. You told them to open the upper gates. Bly wanted to cut Sedge Drove. He did, ma'am. Mr. Bly has wanted to cut Sedge Drove 3 times in 11 years, and always in a week when the water was high enough to be frightening, and not high enough to be dangerous. A cut bank must afterward be made good at the estate's charge, by whichever contractor Mr. Bly recommends. She let that sit exactly as long as she meant it to. Now, my nephew has told me what he intends, and I see by your hands that nobody has told you. He means to marry you. The clock went on for 11 seconds, and Damaris counted them without meaning to. Ma'am, I came here to beg. I know what you came here to do, girl. I am old, I am not deaf, and the household has talked of nothing else since the soup. Do you want my advice or my sympathy? I have very little of the second, and I am told the first is better value. The advice, ma'am. My nephew will not tell you why. Every word he says will be true, and it will not be all of it, and you will know it is not all of it. Take him, or refuse him as you please. But do not marry him imagining a title will be given to you. It will be lent. This house will teach you the difference inside a fortnight. I do not understand you. Then attend, and it will be unpleasant. She set both hands on the head of her stick. You have had the whole of it from the housemaid already, I dare say. Every book in this house and on this level is in Mr. Bly's hands, and the commissioners are 7 gentlemen who dine 4 times a year and sign what he puts before them. And my nephew, who is not a fool but is something a great deal more expensive, which is a man carrying a private grief, has not looked into any of it since the day his brother was buried. His brother died in December in this house. Do not ask him, and on no account be sorry at him. Everybody has been sorry at him for a year, and it has done him no good whatever. Lady Adeline's mouth moved. So, you will be a duchess, and you will have nothing, and you will find that a very interesting arithmetic. Now I give you the one thing I have that is worth anything. I have lived here 62 years, and there are 4 old servants who will do a thing because I ask it, and would not do it for the king. Ordish is one. That is my whole army, and I lend it to you entire. To do what, ma'am? Whatever you find you cannot bear not to do. You have been in this house one night and have already stood at that window counting my nephew's banks. I loathe modesty above every other cheap virtue. What did you count? So Damaris told her. The willow on the crown, the white brick without a tooth, the wheel throwing half, the gauge post painted over. Lady Adeline listened without moving anything but her eyes, and then said, in a voice with something new underneath it, Say the last one again. The post is painted over, ma'am, not repainted. The scale has been set new, and it is set low. I would want a level and half a day to swear to it, but I would want to swear to it. Then you had better get a level, said Lady Adeline Ferrand. He came to her next morning in the room with the fire, and did it standing, and was scrupulous and brief, and did not touch her hand. He would not forgive the debt. He said so before anything else, and Damaris found afterward that she respected him for it, beyond all reason. £940 on 2 bonds was a true debt, honestly recorded, and he would not pretend it away. What he would do was this. Her father would come out of the county jail within the week and go to the old bailiff's house at Sedge Drove, with a fire in it and a woman to cook, and the bonds would lie unpressed for as long as she was his wife. And a settlement would be made on her before the marriage. Money given to her would be her father's creditors' money by Tuesday. Money settled on her was hers, and no creditor in England could reach through a settlement to touch a farthing of it. That is the only shape in which a thing may be given in this country, and never taken back. I have looked for another. There is not one. Your Grace, why? He stood in the window light with his hands behind his back, and she watched him decide. I will answer that. Entirely, and you will not like some of it. But I cannot answer it yet, and I will not give you half, because half would be a lie wearing a truth's coat. Ask me at midsummer. That is a great deal to ask of a woman you are asking to marry you. It is. I know exactly how much it is. I am asking anyway. She thought of her father's chest, and the fleet at Lady Day, and thought with a clarity that shocked her that she was not being bought, because a woman who is being bought is told why. Then I will marry you, and I will not ask again until midsummer. But I will tell you what I am, so you cannot say afterward you were not warned. I am my father's daughter. I read water. If I live in this house, I shall not be able to help looking at your banks, and when I have looked, I shall not be able to help saying what I see. And everybody who has known me tells me I say it very badly. Something went across his face. It was a long way from a smile, but it was in the same country. Say it badly, he said. They were married 11 days later at 9 in the morning in the estate church. The rain coming off the cedar. Nobody present but the rector, Lady Ottoline, Ordish, and 2 witnesses fetched in out of the yard, who were awkward about their boots. By the Sunday there was a book being kept on it, in the malt house behind the Halvard Arms, in a ledger that had once tallied eel traps. There was no malice in it, and that was the part Damaris found hardest afterward. A man in the fens will bet on a hard frost without wishing anybody's pipes to burst. The wagers were on how long she would last. At a shilling the common stake. Ordish told her of it on the Tuesday, standing very straight with his eyes on the wainscot, having decided in some private court of his own that she was better armed than sheltered. What is the shortest anybody has given me? Michaelmas, your Grace. Mr. Bly's under gardener. He gave no reason, and I did not care for the way he laughed. She found she was not angry. She would have bet the same way herself a fortnight since, and said so, and Ordish looked at the wainscot rather harder. Because Lady Ottoline had been right, and it did not take a fortnight. It took 9 days. Damaris asked the housekeeper, Mrs. Pargeter, for the household books, and was told, with a curtsy of perfect correctness, that Mr. Bly had them, and was gone into Harlingford until Thursday. She asked for a horse, and was given one, and told Mr. Bly had desired the mare be spared the drove roads until the ground firmed. She said at dinner that the willow wanted cutting off the crown at Ellerby before the frosts, and the Duke said yes, and said it to Bly next day, and Bly said, certainly, your Grace, at once, and the willow stood there still at the year's end. Nothing was refused her. That was the shape of it. She was a duchess of 11 days, and not one soul refused her a single thing. They agreed warmly and at once, and then the thing did not happen, and there was never anybody to be angry at, because everybody had said yes. By the 9th day she understood that she had been given a title the way you give a child the reins on a leading rein, and that she might sit at Salomere 40 years being agreed with, while the water came over a bank one February at 3 in the morning. So on the 10th day she went up and unwrapped the oilcloth, and did not open the 5th book, because she was still a coward about that. She took out instead the thing that lay beneath the 6, a leveling staff in 3 folding lengths of pine, painted in feet and quarters, the paint gone at the joints from 30 years of a man's hands. Then she went down the back stairs and out past the kitchen garden in her father's old boots, and set the staff up in the mud at the foot of the gauge post at Ellerby Wash, and began, for the first time in 5 years, to take a level. There was no instrument to be had. Her father's level had gone with the furniture, and the only other in the parish was Mr. Bly's, and Damaris would sooner have asked him for the loan of his teeth. So she made one, which is a thing any surveyor's child can do, and almost nobody else knows is possible. She begged a length of leaden gutter pipe and 2 glass files from the stillroom shelf, waxed the files into the ends, filled it with water and let the bubbles out over 2 evenings. Water finds its own height. It cannot be bribed and it does not care whose bank it is. She began at the benchmark cut into the plinth of the church tower, the one mark in the parish nobody had touched in 80 years, and worked out along the drove with Nettle carrying the staff, 100 yards at a time. It took 2 days. Nettle was one of Lady Audeline's 4, and never once asked what she was doing, which she thought showed a great deal of sense. On the second afternoon she came to the gauge post at Ellerby Wash and read it again, and sat down in the wet grass with the book on her knee for some time. The scale on that post stood 9 inches and a half below where it ought to have stood. It was not a mistake. A mistake in that country is an inch, or the width of a thumb. 9 inches and a half is a decision. She walked back to the church and stopped at the porch, where the parish board hung with its papers in rows, bans and vestry notices, and the statement of the drainage works pasted up every Michaelmas for ratepayers to read if they cared to, and almost nobody did. She found the line without much looking. Ellerby Main Bank, crown raised 9 inches, 412 pounds. Damaris stood in the porch with the rain coming off the gutter behind her, and understood the whole shape of it at once. The bank had not been raised. She had just spent 2 days proving it. But set the gauge, scale 9 inches and a half lower, and every flood down the O ever afterward reads 9 inches smaller than it is, and the bank appears to stand exactly as high as a man was paid 412 pounds to make it stand. Somebody had not simply stolen the money. Somebody had gone out afterward with a saw and a paint pot and altered the evidence of the water itself. She told nobody. She went home and put the water level under her bed beside the oilcloth, and went in to read to Lady Adeline, and her voice was perfectly steady all through a very dull book about the Holy Land. That week she also had the willow off the crown at Ellerby. She did not ask anybody. She took Nettle and Crake and a boy from the home farm out with billhooks on the Wednesday, and by Thursday the roots were grubbed and the holes puddled with clay. It had been agreed to at least 4 times since October. The Duke of Halvard rode out on the Saturday and found the crown of his own bank bare and tidy against the sky, and was told by Ordish, whose eyes were somewhere over his left shoulder, that Bligh had wanted a contractor and a hoist for it, and that her Grace had wanted Nettle and Crake. He met her that evening on the bank by accident, which was the only way he met anybody that year. She had the staff over her shoulder and mud to the knee, and stood off the path to let him by, as she had for 6 weeks, and he did not go by. "You cut my willow!" I did. I should have asked. I did not, because I have asked for a number of things in 6 weeks, and every one has been agreed to, and none has happened. And I began to think asking was the wrong instrument. He looked at her. Damaris had spent 5 years being looked at by men who held paper of her father's, and had learned to keep her eyes down, because a woman who looks up is thought to be putting herself forward. She found, on the bank in the failing light, that she was not doing it. She was looking back at him the way she looked at a run of water, steadily, to see which way it went, and it did not frighten her at all. It seemed to unsettle him considerably. "What is the staff for?" "Leveling your banks, sir." "And what do my banks come to?" She thought about the 9 inches and a half. "I am not finished," she said. That was not a lie, and it was not the truth, and she knew the difference perfectly well as she said it. He looked at her a moment longer, touched his hat and rode on, and Damaris stood in the wet with her father's staff and felt the number sitting in her chest. 9 inches is nothing. 9 inches is a hand's breadth. You could not see 9 inches on a bank a mile long if you stood and stared at it all day. 9 inches, on sleeping ground, in February, at 3 in the morning, is the whole difference between a wet floor and 9 more names. We shall pause here for a moment. If you would like to hear how this ends, and to be told when the next story is ready, do please subscribe. By the turn of the year, Salomir had stopped noticing her, which is the highest honor a great house pays to anybody. The maids came to her about the linen because she answered, and the sluice keeper touched his hat in the way a man does to somebody whose business is the same as his own. She was still refused nothing and granted nothing, but the house had quietly stopped betting on her. The drainage yard stood behind the Ellerby pump, a walled acre with the contractor's shed, and the gear house, and the spoil heaps, and Damaris went there in the first week of January, on an errand that was entirely honest. The scoop wheel was throwing half what it should, and she meant to look at the race herself and be able to say why. The yardmen were all at the pump. The gate stood open because a cart had gone through it. Nobody stopped her, and nobody would have, because it was her husband's yard. She looked at the race, silted to a depth she could measure with her boot, and coming back past the nettles at the shed end, she saw the post. It lay on its side in the dead nettles with a barrow leaning on it. Oak, 6 feet, weathered silver. A saw cut clean through the foot where it had been taken out of the ground. She knew it before she was near it. She had spent 2 days of her life looking at its brother. Damaris knelt in the nettles in her good cloak and turned it over, and there were the marks, feet and quarters, cut into the oak itself and not painted on, the way they did them when her father was young, worn shallow and perfectly legible. She laid the old post beside the new datum in her head and read the difference off her own 2 days of figures, and it came out at 9 inches and a half, and she sat back on her heels in the nettles and heard her own heart going. They had not even burned it, and that frightened her most. A man who burns the old post thinks somebody might come looking. A man who saws it off and throws it behind a shed for 11 years has never once been afraid of anybody. The shed door was open on its hasp. Afterward, she was never able to say honestly that she had gone in for a reason. She went in because the door was open and because she had a post at her back that proved a lie, and inside there was a bench and tools and a stove gone out, and on the bench a tin. They were printed forms. Certificate of Works, completed to the satisfaction of the Commissioners of Sewers for the Halvard level. A space for the works, a space for the sum, a space for the date, 3 lines at the foot for signatures. There were 18 of them in the tin, and every one was blank, and every one was signed. 3 names at the foot of each in 3 different hands, in good black ink gone brown at the bottom of the pile. 18 finished certificates, waiting for somebody to write in what had been done and what it had cost. Damaris stood in the cold shed with the tin in her hands and understood she was not looking at a man who had stolen from an estate, but at a machine. 7 gentlemen who dined 4 times a year had signed their names to nothing at all, in advance, so that they need never be troubled, and a careful man had been filling in the blanks for 11 years. Out in the yard a gate went. There were boots on the cinder path, and a voice she knew said pleasantly, "In the shed, is she?" Well, well. Mr. Osric Bligh was the most courteous man Damaris ever met, and she thought afterward that this was the whole of his method, and that he had probably never needed to say a single threatening word to anybody. He did not ask what she was doing. He came in out of the daylight with his hat in his hand, and said he was glad to find her, that he had heard her Grace was interested in the wheel, and if she gave him a day, he would have the whole of it out and cleaned. She put the tin back on the bench. He did not look at it. "You will forgive an old fellow's memory," he said on the path, with the rain starting. "I knew your father." "Did you, Mr. Bligh?" "I was a clerk to the commissioners when he had the Marham contract. 22 I was. I have never in 30 years seen books kept like Elias Rushmer's." He stopped to let her through the gate first. It is the careful ones it goes hardest with. Everybody believes a careful man was careless, just the once. It only wants the once. Damaris did not answer him. "I am glad the bonds are lying quiet," said Mr. Bligh. "It is a comfort to a family. Of course a bond is only paper. It may be assigned to another holder any day of the week, no discourtesy meant, and the new holder may press or not as he thinks fit. I have known it done in a morning." He put his hat on. "There is a good deal of the estate's paper in my hands, Your Grace." "Nobody has given me to understand anything at all, Mr. Bligh," said Damaris. "It is the great characteristic of this place." He laughed as though she had been charming, wished her good day, and went back into his yard. She got as far as the drove before her hands began to shake, and stood and let them until they stopped. And then she did nothing for 11 days, and afterward, when she was old, they were the days she was least able to forgive. Her reasons were good. That is what nobody tells you about cowardice. Her father was at Sedge Drove with a fire, and a woman to cook, and a chest better than it had been in 5 years, and every hour of it rested on paper Osric Bligh could put into another man's hands before dinner. She had 2 days of levels taken by a woman with a homemade instrument, against a county of gentlemen who would not take a woman's figures over a signed certificate, and underneath all of it, in the place where she did not go, there was the 5th book, because if she pulled at this it would not stop at Bligh. It would go back 20 years and 400 yards of bank and 9 people, and Damaris did not know, had never allowed herself to know, whether what she found at the bottom would clear her father or hang him. So she held her tongue, and read to Lady Adeline, and went out at Candlemas with a basket to the Fen cottages, and on the low ground below the Ellerby bank, she met Hesper Noakes. The old woman was 80, and lived alone in a one-room cottage, with a stone floor and a mark on the wall. Damaris saw it while the kettle was on, a dark line across the lime wash at the height of her own hip, faded but perfectly plain, and Hesper Noakes saw her looking. "That is the Marham water, my duck. You did not have it whitened out." "No." The old woman got the cups down. "My boy is in that mark. He was 19. I keep him where I can see him." Damaris sat still with her hands in her lap. "They said after it were the surveyor's fault," said Hesper Noakes comfortably, warming the pot. "I never said so. I told the vestry that spring the bank were low. I walked it every day of my life to the eel traps, and it were low at the turn by the willow holt, and I said so to 3 men that could read and write. But I am a Fen woman, and I cannot sign my name, and there was a paper with the gentlemen's names on it that said the bank were made good." She poured. "A paper beats an old woman, my duck. There is no wickedness in it. That is only how it is done." "Mrs. Noakes," Damaris said, and found her voice had gone somewhere. "And this bank. Now, oh, it is low," said Hesper Noakes, and put the cup in her hand. "Anybody on this drove will tell you so. We do not trouble his grace with it. He is a young man, and he has buried his brother, and he has enough." Damaris walked home in the last of the light, past 40 cottages of people who would not trouble his grace with it. That was the machine. It was not clever. It had never needed to be. It ran on an old woman who could not sign her name, a grieving man who would not look, 7 gentlemen who signed in advance so as not to be disturbed, and a duchess who had gone 11 days with a tin of certificates in her head because she was frightened for her father. Every single person in it was being decent. She stopped on the bank at Ellerby in the dark and put her hand flat on the crown of it, as she had put it on the brick of the sluice on the first day. A suspicion was worth nothing. A suspicion in her mouth, against Osric Bligh, before 7 commissioners and a county, was worth less than nothing, and she would only ever get to say it once. She wanted the thing itself. She built it the way her father had taught her to build a survey, which is to say from the outside in, from the things nobody can move. She could not get at the rate books. She never once tried. Instead, she took the whole level, 11 miles of it, in the dark ends of mornings between February and April, with Nettle holding the staff and never a question out of him. Every bank, every drove, every sluice sill, tied back to the church benchmark that had not moved in 80 years. When she finished, she had a true section of the Halvard level in her own hand, and it was the first honest one in 20 years. Then she went for the paper, and the paper she went for was public. The Michaelmas statements were pasted at the porch every year, and afterward folded into the parish chest, and the rector, a mild man with a passion for church music and no interest in drainage, gave her the key without asking why. 11 years of statements, every work claimed and every sum charged. She copied the whole of it out at night. Against that she set the men who had done the work, or had not. Marl the brickmaker kept a daybook because his father had. Threlfall, who carted clay, had his notes of loads. Odgers had cut turf on that level 30 years, and could tell her which years he had been called out, and which he had sat at home wondering. None of them was hiding anything. None had ever been asked. 11 years, and not one soul had gone to the men who held the barrows and said, "Tell me what you did." She kept the fair copy where nobody would ever look for it. The water level lay under her bed in its canvas, a length of leaden pipe with a file waxed into either end, and the pipe was hollow and empty when it was not in use. Every night she rolled the day's work small and pushed it down inside the instrument that had begun the whole business, and slept above it. Twice she came near to losing all of it. In March, Mr. Bligh called on a matter of tithes and asked Ordish pleasantly whether her grace had been much in the parish chest, as the rector was an untidy man, and things went astray. Ordish said he was sure he could not say, and came upstairs afterward and told her word for word, with his eyes on the wainscot, offering no opinion at all. In April, she came off the bank at first light and found Bly's under gardener on the drove with a spade he was not using, a quarter of a mile from anything that wanted digging. And all that spring, without either of them intending it, she and the Duke of Halvard came to know one another in the map room. It was a long room over the kitchen passage, every wall hung with plans of the level going back 120 years, on linen and on skin, browning in their frames. It was the one room he still used. She had gone in for a plan of the Marham cut, and he was there, and she made to withdraw, and he said without turning round, "Third press. Second drawer. Badly folded, I am afraid. That is my doing." After that she went most evenings, and he was most evenings there, and the maps became a country the two of them held in common. They talked of the level, which was safe ground, and they both knew why it was safe. He was not a cold man. She had that wrong a long while. He was a man who had carried one thing alone for a year and lost the knack of setting it down. He spoke of his brother once. It was late, the fire low, a plan of the Ellerby wash open under his hands that he was not looking at. Gervais went through my father's papers the summer before last. He was the tidy one. I never opened a box in my life he had not already labeled. He turned the sheet over. He wrote to me in June. I was in town. He said there were things in those letters he could not account for and would not put in writing, and would I come? I did not go. I answered in August, which is 2 months, and said I would come at Christmas and he was not to work himself into a state over old paper. Damaris did not move. He took a fever in the last week of November and was dead in 9 days. I came at Christmas as I had promised. He was quiet a moment. I read the letters in January, and I found my brother had been right, and that I had known him 29 years, and had not thought him worth 2 months of the post. She did not say she was sorry. She had watched 3 people say it to him that spring, and seen what it did to his face. "Then believe him now," she said. "That is the only part of it still open to you. The rest is shut, and you may knock at it as long as you like." He looked up at that. "You have leveled 11 miles of my banks with a pipe and 2 files," he said. Nettle told Craik, and Craik told Ordish, and Ordish told my great-aunt, who told me at some length and with a good deal of enjoyment. Why? She had known the question would come, and had decided exactly how much she could afford to answer. "Because my father signed a certificate once," Damaris said, "and it has cost him 20 years, and his health, and his name, and I find I want to know what a certificate is worth. That is all of it I can give you tonight. Ask me at midsummer," he said, "and I shall tell you why that is the most uncomfortable sentence anybody has said to me in a year. I have not asked." "No," he said, "you have not." And they sat on either side of a low fire, in a room full of maps, each holding one end of the same rope, and neither willing to pull first. Lady Ottoline sent for her on the Monday in Easter week, and had a thing on the table beside her chair wrapped in green baize. "Take that off. No, do not be careful with it. It is not a relic, it is a tool, and it has been used badly enough in its time." Under the baize was a rod, 7 feet of black oak in 2 sleeved lengths, shod at both ends with brass gone the color of a farthing, cut along one face in feet and inches with the marks let in and filled with lead. "That is the Halvard rod," said Lady Ottoline. "There has been one in this house since before the level was cut. Every bank, every sluice, every yard of clay on 11 miles has been measured against it, and the estate keeps it and not the commissioners, because whoever holds the measure decides what a thing is." Damaris put her hand on it. The oak had gone smooth and slightly hollow where 3 generations had gripped it. "Where has it been?" "In Mr. Bly's cupboard at Ellerby, since the month my nephew's father died." The black eyes were very bright. "He took it for safekeeping. He wrote a civil note about damp. Nobody thought of it for 11 years, because nobody in this house has measured anything in 11 years. How did you get it back?" "I sent Ordish with a request in writing, in my own hand from a woman of 79, who has outlived 4 bishops and does not expect to be refused." Lady Ottoline permitted herself something at the corner of her mouth. "He could hardly refuse. It would have been an admission. That is the whole art of dealing with careful men. Ask them in writing for a thing they have no right to keep. Ma'am, I am not a commissioner. I cannot be. There is no office in the world they will let me hold." "No. So you will hold the measure instead, which is better, and you will hold it where the whole level can see you holding it." The old woman leaned forward. "You have been going out in the dark, girl. Stop it. On a fen, A person is visible for 3 miles, and there is no help for it. So you may as well choose your hour. Go out at 9 in the morning. Carry that rod on your shoulder along the top of the bank from Ellerby to Marham and back, and let every soul in this parish stand at their door and watch you do it. And by June they will have stopped asking each other what you are, and started asking you what you have found. She carried it out the next morning at 9. A woman walking a bank at dawn with a homemade pipe is a curiosity. A woman walking the same bank at 9 in the morning with the halvard rod on her shoulder, stopping at every gate, is something the fen had a word for, and the word was surveyor. They began to come to her. That was the part she had not expected. Odgers came first, turning his hat, and said he had kept his rate receipts since his mother died, because his mother had said always keep the paper, and would her grace care to see them. A woman at Sedgegrove had hers in a tea caddy. A man at Marham End had his in the family Bible with the births. Most of them could not read what was written on them. They had kept them 20 years all the same. By the end of May she had 104 rate receipts copied fair, against 11 years of Michaelmas statements, against the daybooks of 3 contractors, against a true section of the level taken with her own instrument, and checked against the estate's rod. She never had the rate books and never would. She had built the whole thing from the outside in, and where her figures met the public paper, they did not agree by £4,160. Lady Sidonie Ferrand came home to Salomere in the 2nd week of May. She was the Duke's half-sister, 34, the only child of the 5th Duke's second marriage, left £120 a year and the assurance of her brother's affection. She had spent 11 years going from one country house to another on visits of 5 weeks, because a visit of 5 weeks costs nothing, and a woman with £120 a year cannot keep a house of her own. She was cleverer than Osric Bligh, and she saw inside 4 days what Bligh in 6 months had not troubled to see. Bligh had looked at Damaris and seen an interfering woman. Sidonie saw a woman hiding something. "Rushmer," she said pleasantly over the tea tray, turning it on her tongue. "I have been trying all week to think where I know it. Are you Lincolnshire people? My father was a surveyor. He had work all over this level. And has he retired? Or is he still at it? He is at Sedgegrove. He is not well. How fortunate that he should be so near." The cup went down without a sound. "I am told you go out a great deal with that rod. I do admire it. I have never been able to take an interest in anything useful, and I have often thought it must be a comfort to be occupied." She smiled. "I only watch. It is my one accomplishment. My brother thinks me idle, and he is quite right, but an idle woman sees everything, because there is nothing else in front of her." Damaris met the bright, careful eyes and understood, with a coldness in her stomach, that the real danger in that house had been at the table 2 days. "Then you keep better accounts than I do, ma'am," she said. "I have never learned to watch people. I only ever learned to watch water." From the depths of her chair, Lady Ottoline made a dry sound that in a less dignified woman would have been a laugh. Sidonie's own affairs were simpler than her manner. She owed £190 in 3 counties, chiefly to milliners and a jeweller at Bath, and for 6 years those debts had been settled twice a year by Mr. Osric Bligh, out of a fund that appeared in no statement at any church porch. Nothing had ever been said, and nothing needed to be. He had made her comfortable and she had made him respectable, and each knew what would happen to the other if the arrangement were ever laid on a table. So when Bligh said to her, mildly, in the yew-walk, that her grace had been a great deal in the parish chest and among the tenants, and that it was a pity a young woman should tire herself over old paper, Sidonie did not need any further instruction. She wrote 3 letters in the last week of May. One to a cousin married to an attorney at Harlingford, asking in the mild way of a lady with nothing to do whether anything was remembered locally of a surveyor named Rushmer. One to the clerk of the vestry there, for a copy of the inquest taken after the Marham Bank breach, which was a public record and could be refused to nobody. One to a woman she had known at school whose husband held bond paper all over the county, asking without appearing to ask who had the Rushmer bonds now. She gave them to the boy for the Harlingford bag, went in to dinner, and was very charming about the fish. The answers came back over 11 days, and they were better than anything she had hoped for, and they all arrived, as such things do, in the same week as the summer audit. The commissioners of the Halvard level dined at Salomere twice a year. the only occasion on which the 7 of them were in one room at one time. They came at 3 on the second Thursday in June. Sir Aubrey Trant, who was chairman, 6 other gentlemen, Mr. Bligh with his boxes, and the long table in the great parlor, laid with green baize and the year's certificates at the chairman's elbow. Damaris had meant to wait. Her case wanted 3 more weeks and 1 more contractor's book, and a half-built case is worse than none at all. It went out of her hands at 20 minutes past 4. The door opened and Ordish came in, with an expression Damaris had never seen on him, and behind him, hat in hand, a small grey attorney from Harlingford named Peveril, with a clerk and a parish constable, and a paper. The Rushmore bonds had been assigned on the 16th of the month to a gentleman at Boston who wished to be paid. Mr. Peveril was very sorry and had no discretion in the matter. There was a writ, and a debtor at Sedge Drove, and he proposed to execute it that evening, and had come first to the house out of respect to his grace. Damaris stood up, and Lady Sidonie Ferrand, who had been sitting by the window with her workbox for an hour and a half, waiting for exactly this, rose too, and said, in a voice of perfect gentleness that carried the length of that table, "Aubrey, before anybody goes anywhere, somebody ought to say who the Duchess of Halvard's father is." She read the vestry copy aloud, which took under a minute. "The Marham Bank breach, 20 years since, 400 yards, 9 lives. The certificate that the bank was made good, signed by the surveyor to the works, Elias Rushmore, and read into the record at the inquest." "He was never prosecuted," said Sidonie, laying it down. "There was no evidence he had been paid to sign it, and none that he had not. And his daughter came here in October to beg for his debts, and my brother married her inside a fortnight, and since February, she has walked every yard of this level with an instrument, and been in the parish chest, and been about the tenants collecting their old receipts, and told nobody in this house what she is doing." She turned to Damaris, and there was no triumph in her face at all, which was somehow worse. "You have your father's field books. Here, you have had them all along." Every face at that table came round. "Yes," said Damaris, "and you have never shown them to my brother." "No, nor to the commissioners. No, nor opened them yourself, I dare say, since you would hardly want to know." Sidonie's voice was very kind. "Gentlemen, I make no accusation. I say only what everybody in this room can see. There is one set of papers in England that could prove what was done at Marham, and they are in the hands of the one person alive who would rather they were never read, and she has married the man who owns this level, and she has spent 5 months quietly finding out which of these banks would show it." The silence went on rather a long time. Damaris did not look at the commissioners, or at Bligh, who had not moved and had not spoken, and was looking at the baize. She looked at her husband. The Duke of Halvard stood at the end of his own table, and she watched him turn it over and find that every single fact was true, because every single fact was true. The books, the silence, the survey. The marriage he had asked for 11 days after she walked up his drive, for reasons he never gave her, on a promise that neither of them would speak of it until midsummer. And she saw the exact moment he arrived at the thing that would finish her, which was that he had married her partly for those very books, and had never said so, and now believed she had married him for precisely the same reason. She saw the map room shut behind his eyes. It is a strange thing to dread a moment for 5 years, and to arrive in it, and find the dread has gone out of it altogether. Damaris stood at the end of the green baize with the whole room looking at her, and found she was not frightened. She had spent her life keeping her head down in order to be safe, and here was safety ending in front of 7 gentlemen and a constable, and the ceiling had not come in. "Every word Lady Sidonie has said is true," she said, "and I will save you the trouble of drawing it out of me. I am Elias Rushmore's daughter." He signed the Marham certificate. It was read at the inquest, and 9 people were dead. "I have his 6 field books. They have been in this house since the night I came to beg, and I told nobody. I have never opened the 5th. My father told me not to, and I did not. And I should like to say that was obedience. It was fear. I was afraid he was guilty, and the proof was in my own hands. And for 5 years, I carried a thing about the country that I would not weigh. You cannot think worse of that than I do. I married the Duke of Halvard because my father was in Harlingford Gaol, with a weakness of the chest, and I had no other way on earth to get him out. I did not marry him for those books, and I cannot prove it, and I shall not try. Now I shall tell you what I have been doing on the banks, because none of you has asked, and it is the only thing here that matters." She put her hands on the back of a chair. "The Ellerby Main Bank was certified raised 9 inches at a charge of £412. It has not been touched. I have leveled it from the benchmark at the church tower, which no man has moved in 80 years, and checked it against the estate's own rod. The gauge post at Ellerby Wash was cut down, and a new scale set 9 inches and a half low, so that every flood on this level for 11 years has read short, and every bank has appeared to stand that much prouder of the water than it does. The old post is in the nettles behind the contractor's shed, with the marks cut in the oak. Any one of you may go and look at it before dark. In a tin on the bench inside that shed, there are 19 certificates of works completed. They are blank. They are signed. 3 names apiece, gentlemen, in your own hands. I have 11 years of your Michaelmas statements out of the parish chest, the day books of the brickmaker and the clay carter and the turf man, none of whom has ever been asked what he did, and 104 rate receipts kept in tea caddies and family Bibles by people who cannot read them. Where my figures meet your paper, the difference is £4,160. Nobody moved. Somewhere down the passage a door went, and then Mr. Osric Bligh, without lifting his eyes from the green baize, said quietly, 18. It was out of him before he knew it, in the voice of a careful man hearing a wrong figure. Damaris had counted that tin twice in the cold in January. She had said the wrong number on purpose, and she had been waiting 5 months to say it. Sir Aubrey Trant turned his head very slowly. "Sit down, gentlemen," said the Duke of Halvard. It took the rest of that day and the whole of the night, and it was not done by Damaris at all in the end, which she had not foreseen and never afterward forgot. The first thing the Duke did was stop the writ. He gave Mr. Peveril a note of hand for the bond and the costs on it, asked him to be so good as to dine, and sent a groom to Sedge Drove with the chaise. The second thing he did was send 4 men to the yard with a lantern and a cart, and at 7 in the evening the old gauge post of Ellerby Wash was carried up the front steps of Salomere and stood on end against the paneling, 6 feet of weathered oak with a saw cut through the foot, and every man in that room went and put his thumb in the marks. Then they came in. Marl the brickmaker came in his Sunday coat with his father's day book and was so uneasy in that house he could not be got to sit. Threlfall came with his loads. Odgers came in from the turf and told 7 gentlemen, in a voice that got steadier as he went, which years he had been called out to the Ellerby Bank, and the answer was none of them. Amos Craik fetched the fen people by lantern light, and they came in 2s and 3s with their receipts in tea caddies and Bibles and in one case folded inside a hat, and Damaris read them out while Sidoni Ferrand, who wrote faster than anybody in that house, took them down without being asked. Hesper Nokes came last, on Amos Craik's arm, at 11:30 at night, and told the commissioners of sewers for the Halvard level that she had walked the Marham Bank every day of her life to the eel traps, that it was low at the turn, by the willow holt in the January before it went out, and that she had said so to 3 men who could read and write, and not one of them wrote it down. "I could not sign, you see," she said. "There was a paper with your names on it, and I had only my mouth." Sir Aubrey Trant, who had been chairman 19 years and had signed everything Osric Bligh ever put in front of him, sat with his hand over his eyes. At 1 in the morning the Duke opened the year's certificates himself, and the tin from the shed beside them, and compared the hands, and understood the whole of it in about 6 minutes, being, as his great-aunt had said, not a fool but a man carrying a private grief, which is a different and far more expensive thing. He closed the tin. When he spoke, it was not to Bligh, and not to the commissioners. "My brother wrote to me about this," he said, "and I did not go." Nobody answered him. "Mr. Bligh, you will be out of my yard tonight, and off this level by noon tomorrow, and every figure this lady has taken will go with you to the Harlingford bench, and after that to the assizes. Whatever you have left of my tenant's money you will restore. What you have not, I shall restore, and count it cheap." His voice had gone quiet rather than loud. "Ordish, see him pack. Stay in the room while he does it." Bligh went. There was nothing else in the world for him to do. At the door he looked back at Damaris, and all the courtesy had gone off him like paint off a post. "You could not simply have walked the bank," he said. "No," said Damaris. "I never could. Good night, Mr. Bligh." Her father came in at 2 in the morning. They had wrapped him in a rug in the chaise, and he came up the steps between Amos Craik and Ordish, 61 and looking 80. He stopped inside the door and saw the old gauge post standing against the paneling and put out one hand and touched the sawn end of it, and his face came apart. Damaris fetched the oilcloth down and laid the 6 books on the green baize in front of him. "Papa, I never opened the 5th. You told me not to." Elias Rushmer sat down slowly. "I hoped you would not," he said. "I have been hoping it 5 years, and being ashamed of hoping it, which is a wearing way to live." He put his hand flat on the cover. "Open it now, in front of them. I am too tired to read it aloud." So it was the Duke of Halvard who read it, under the lamp, in a room gone entirely silent. It was not what any of them expected, and it was not a clean thing. There was a section of the Marham Bank taken in the January before the breach, showing the crown 9 inches low at the turn by the willow holt. There was the fair copy of a letter he had sent the commissioners that month saying so, and saying it must be made up before the spring water came down, and that he would not certify it otherwise. And there was his note of the answer, given him in a room at Salomere and not in writing. The money for the Marham works had been spent elsewhere by the 5th Duke of Halvard. The certificate would be signed by somebody that quarter. A surveyor of 1 in 40 with a wife and a daughter might think about which of them was to sign it. And there was a line under that, written afterward, in a hand that had gone unsteady. "I signed it. No man made my hand move. I signed it, and in February the water came, and 9 people are dead, and there is no paper in the world that mends it." There was one more entry in the book. It gave the name of the clerk who had carried the instruction from the 5th Duke to the surveyor's lodging, and had stood in the doorway with his hat in his hand, while the surveyor thought about his daughter. He had been 22. His name was Osric Bligh. The Duke finished reading, and stood a long moment holding his family's own account of itself in his hands. "Mrs. Noakes," he said, "I am obliged to you for coming out at your age at night. Will you allow me to say to you, in front of these gentlemen, that you were right in the January, and my father knew you were right, and that the bank went out because he had spent the money?" That left Sidonie. She had sat through the whole of it with the pen still in her hand, taking down the Fen people's receipts because Damaris had asked her to, and she had not been able to think of a reason to refuse. Bligh's own accounts came out of the office at Ellerby at 3 in the morning, and there among them, twice a year for 6 years, were the milliners and the jeweler at Bath. She did not deny it. She put down the pen and stood up, straight as a poker, and made her last throw. "You will turn me out, I suppose," she said to her brother. "Do only tell me where to. I have £120 a year and a dead father's affection, and I have spent 11 years going about this county on 5-week visits, being useful with the flowers, so that I need not sit down anywhere long enough to be asked what my income is. You have never in your life not known where you would sleep." Her voice was level and her hands were not. She hid 6 books to keep an attorney off her father. I held my tongue 6 years to keep a milliner off me. I am only afraid, and I have been afraid a very long while, and it is unspeakably tiring. The Duke's face was hard as the sluice brick. Damaris knew what he was about to be, which was just, and what just would come to. A woman of 34, turned out at 3 in the morning, with £120, and the county talking by Sunday. "Your Grace," she said, "may I?" He closed his mouth. He inclined his head. Damaris went down the room and stood before the upright, frightened, clever woman who had tried that afternoon to finish her. "There are 104 receipts on this table," she said, "and there will be 400 before we are done, and every one has to be entered in a register in a fair hand and posted where the people who gave them can have it read to them. There is nobody in this house who can do it. I write like a surveyor, and it takes all night. You have written faster than I can speak for 4 hours without being asked. You will have the keeping of the register. You will have the little office at the end of the North Passage, with a lock on the door and the key in your own pocket, and 100 a year out of the level for the work, which is a wage and not a kindness, and which no man in this house may stop. I did not offer you that because I am generous. I held my tongue for 11 days with 18 certificates in my head, because I was frightened for my father. You held yours for 6 years because you were frightened for yourself. I am very poorly placed to hang you for it, and I am not going to pretend otherwise in front of my husband." Sidonie Ferrand stared at her. "Why?" she said. It was not a graceful question. It came out of her sideways. "Because I know exactly how tiring it is," said Damaris. "And because a house that has just put out one thief, should not celebrate by making a beggar. Good night, Lady Sidoni." And the Duke looked at his wife across the wreck of his father's estate, and his own long blindness, and something shut in his face since a December he did not speak of, came quietly and painfully open. They called out the level that August. It had not been done in 20 years. In the old way, when a bank wanted making, the whole level turned out. Every commoner and cottager and farmer, so many days' work to the acre, and the parish fed them, and it was half labor and half fare. The Marham works were the last, and after the water came the summons, quietly stopped being sent. Damaris sent it out in the last week of June, over her own name, and there was nobody left to stop her. She did the whole of it. 1,100 yards of the Ellerby Bank and the whole of the Marham Turn, raised to a true crown measured off the estate's rod, with clay hauled by Threlfall, and the puddling done properly, and the turf laid by Odgers, who had waited 30 years to be asked. She victualled 400 people for 9 days, and set out the whole line herself with the staff and a boy. They came out on the 18th of August and worked in weather like a blessing, and on the last afternoon the county came to look, because by then the county could talk of nothing else. Damaris was on the crown at the Marham Turn in a plain stuff gown, with her sleeves pinned back and mud to the elbow, checking the last of the line, entirely unaware of herself. The Duke of Halvard came the length of the new bank to her, in front of 400 people who had bet a shilling apiece on her in a malt house in October. "Walk with me." They went along the crown to the end of the new work, where the county surveyor had set the new datum stone that morning, and looked down the 11 miles of it. Midsummer was 2 months gone, and she had not asked him once. "You are owed an answer," he said. "I am. My father spent the Marham money. You have read what he did to your father to cover it. He did worse afterward, and I have it in his own letters, in a box that Gervais labeled. When the certificate was signed, he made certain Elias Rushmer would never survey on this level again, because a ruined man is a quiet one. Every contract, every recommendation, every word in a gentleman's ear for 4 years. Your father did not fail. He was closed down. His hands were behind his back and he was looking at the water. The debt that put him in Harlingford jail was money he borrowed to live on after my family had taken his living away, and it was owed to us. We ruined him, then lent him the money to be ruined with, then charged him interest on it. Damaris said nothing at all. I found that in January, a year before you came. I have been looking for you ever since, and I could not find you, because you had gone into lodgings under your mother's people's direction, and because I did not dare advertise. And then you walked up my drive in the rain, and told a man on a bank he could not close a gate against a head of water, and gave me your name in my own drawing room. Why did you not simply tell me? Because of what I did next, which is the part I have been dreading since Easter. He turned and faced her. I could have given you money. Money given to you would have been in your father's creditors' hands inside a week, and you would have been where you started. A settlement cannot be reached. It was the only shape that held. That is true, and I have told you the truth every time I have opened my mouth in this business, and it is not all of it. I also knew that Elias Rushmer's field books were the only papers in England that could tell me what my father had done, and that they were not in the estate, and that they would be with his daughter. I married you to make restitution, and I married you because I wanted those books, and I have never been able to decide which of the two got out of the chaise first, and I am not going to insult you by claiming I know. The wind went over the new bank. When we were married, I had the settlement drawn so that it could not be revoked by me for any cause whatsoever, and I did that before I had any notion what you were, which is the one thing in this business I am not ashamed of. You have 900 a year of your own, and this house cannot touch it. Your father's bond is discharged and the paper burnt. There is nothing left that you require from me. So you may keep the name or give it back. If you wish the marriage set aside, there is a way, and it will cost me a great deal of talk, and I will do it tomorrow, and you will not hear a word from me about it, and the settlement stands either way. Everything from here is yours to say. 400 people stood about the new work below them with their tools, pretending not to watch. Damaris looked at him a long moment. Ambrose, she said. She had never used his name. He had not heard it from anybody but his great-aunt in a year and a half, and something went across his face that was worth a good deal more than 900 a year. That is a yes, in case the Duke requires it read aloud. I am tired of holding my tongue. She wiped her hands on her apron because they were shaking, and she did not want him to see it. On 2 conditions. Name them. My father's letter of the January goes into the commissioner's record and is read aloud at the vestry, and the certificate is marked in the book as signed under instruction. He will not live to be old, and I want the paper put right while he can be in the room. And the 9 names go on that stone. All 9. Not my father's, and not yours, theirs. The Duke put his hand over his eyes a moment, and then he laughed, which was a thing the Halvard level had not heard out of him in a year and a half, and which carried a long way in that flat country. From a chair carried out onto the bank end, under a parasol, at 79 years of age, Lady Adeline Ferrand set down her glass and permitted herself to look, for one moment, entirely satisfied. Osric Bligh was tried at the assizes, and the county talked of it for a year. It gave Damaris no pleasure whatever. She went once, heard the certificates read out in a clerk's dry voice, and came home and was ill. The 7 commissioners resigned in a body before they could be asked to. 4,000 and some hundreds was reckoned up over 18 months, receipt by receipt, and given back down every drove on that level, and where Bligh's estate could not meet it, the Duke met it, and never mentioned the figure to anybody, including his wife. Sidonie kept the register, and was better at it than anybody expected, including herself, having spent 11 years learning to notice what people did not want noticed, and never once being asked to put it to use. She did not soften. A woman does not unlearn 6 years of fear in a summer. But she and Damaris arrived in about 2 years at the particular respect of 2 people who both know how tiring it is to be poor among one's equals. She died in that office at 61, still keeping the register, and it took 3 people a fortnight to work out her system. Hesper Noakes had her room lime-washed that autumn. She kept 1 hand's breadth of the old mark by the door, showed it to anybody who asked, and outlived Elias Rushmer by 4 years. Elias Rushmer surveyed the Halvard level one more time. It took 9 months, and he did it sitting down a great deal, and the section hangs in the map room now with his name on it, which was the point. The vestry heard his January letter read in the September, and he was in the room, and the clerk marked the old certificate in the margin in red ink. He walked the New Marham Bank once that autumn on his daughter's arm, read the 9 names on the stone, and said nothing at all. He died the following March. That was the one thing the summer could not mend, and Damaris did not expect it to. The dead do not come back because the living have finally got the paper right. The water level, a length of leaden gutter pipe with 2 files waxed into the ends, hangs on a nail in the map room under the section her father made. Visitors take it for a piece of plumbing. It has never once been explained to any of them. That October the rain came down on the low fen for 11 days, and the O came up over the mark at Ellerby Wash, the true mark now, cut in oak. They went out to the 9 holes together in the dark at 4 in the morning, and there were lanterns on the bank and men at the gates, and the Duchess of Halvard stood at the gauge post with the rod in her hand, and read it and did the sum, and said the wash would hold it, and nobody was to touch the Sedge Drove bank on any account. And the Duke of Halvard, who was standing in the wet at the foot of the sluice among the men with his coat over his head, said, "Do as she says," and went to fetch a bar. Afterward, when the gate was pinned, and the water lying down, and the sky going gray over the 11 miles, he came up onto the bank and stood beside her. "You have put the whole of this level into good order," he said. "There is nothing left to save. What will you do with yourself now, Duchess?" Damaris leaned on the rod and looked at the water, level and unafraid, exactly as she had looked at him from the wet gravel on the first afternoon of all, when he had gone in and told his butler he would ask her to marry him, and had not said why. "There is a bank at Boston wants doing," she said. "I have written to them. They have not the least idea what is coming. A paper had beaten an old woman for 20 years, and 9 people were dead of it, and every soul in the business had been perfectly decent from beginning to end. It took a woman with no standing, no office, no vote, and a piece of gutter pipe to sit down and write a truer one. Water finds its own height. It cannot be argued with, and it cannot be bought, and it does not care whose bank it is. So, in the end, and given long enough, does the truth. But the truth wants somebody to go out in the rain and hold the staff.